I went through every new Pokemon and found the 10 I thought were the most underrated given how strong they were. Scarlet and Violet's official rules have been out for a little bit now, and something like a metagame has formed. Players have identified a bunch of Pokemon they think are strong, such as Armarouge, Dondozo, and Annihilate, but I think there's a lot of Pokemon that have a ton of potential that players aren't really looking at right now. For this list, the main criteria I'm using to rank them is how underrated they are. So the number 10 Pokemon might be stronger than like the number 6 Pokemon, but I think that people have identified that the number 10 Pokemon has more potential than the number 6 Pokemon. Anyway, without further ado, let's just jump into it, starting with number 10, Ceruledge. Pretty early on in the format, players identified that Armarouge was really strong. Armarouge and Ceruledge have a lot in common, but the main difference between them is that Armarouge is a special attacker, whereas Ceruledge is a physical attacker. That's relevant because Armarouge is the only Pokemon in the game who gets access to the attack Expanding Force, which is an unbelievably powerful psychic type attack, at least in psychic terrain. Because of that, Armarouge has been way more popular, especially because it also gets really good support moves like Trick Room and Wide Guard. That being said, many players, myself included, have started to realize how strong Ceruledge is. It has good defensive typing. I like Ghost because it gives you 2 immunities, and Fire is a good defensive type in general. It also has access to the ability Flash Fire, bringing its total number of immunities up to 3. Its signature attack, Bitter Blade, I think is really good. It's a strong move with no drawback that heals the user. I've tested Ceruledge a little bit, and I've really liked it, and Bitter Blade is a big reason why. Because it has so many immunities, and you can also use Terra to change your type defensively on top of an already defensive type, it can be really hard to get damage to stick on Ceruledge. Normally, players would try to chip away at Ceruledge to kind of bring it into range of a stronger attack over time, but that's much harder because Bitter Blade is consistently healing it. I really like that it has access to Shadow Sneak because one of its main drawbacks is that it isn't that fast. Having Stab on a priority move is really nice because there's a lot of times where a Pokemon will survive with low HP or with a Focus Sash, or you need to combo with a stronger attack, and having a strong priority attack to finish off low HP foes just is always coming in handy. I made a video about the top 10 best new Pokemon, and I put Ceruledge on there, and I talked a lot about how Close Combat is a really good coverage move for it. This isn't wrong. Close Combat is really strong, but Ceruledge has some other things that it can do as well. Bulk Up sets have had some popularity, and Terra Blast, especially with Terra Grass, is a really nice combo to hit the water and rock types that give fire types trouble. The only reason Ceruledge isn't higher on this list is because I think a lot of players are already starting to realize how good it is, but this is a Pokemon that, at least to me, looks like it has the potential to win the World Championships. Our number 9 slot goes to Cyclizar, which, unlike Ceruledge, I don't think a lot of players are looking at. Cyclizar was teased ahead of time because it has access to the move Shed Tail, which is a really powerful attack. It's relatively frail, and its offenses are only marginally better than Amoonguss, which isn't a Pokemon known for its offense. It does have a high speed stat, but I think to many players this doesn't justify using it. I personally think it has a lot of potential, and it has to do with its move pool. Specifically, it's not technically a signature move, but it feels like a signature move, Shed Tail. It cuts the user's HP in half, which isn't great, but it does so in exchange for a substitute and a free switch into a new Pokemon that gets to keep the substitute. Now, when I first heard about Cyclizar, I didn't think it was going to be very good unless it had really good stats, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't. I guess it's not a spoiler, I've already mentioned it. It's not that I was wrong, but I just didn't have all of the information. Cyclizar has the ability Regenerator. Whenever the Pokemon switches out, it restores 1/3 of its HP. In other words, Cyclizar is kind of a Shed Tail bot in a sense, in that instead of giving up 50% of its HP, it only gives up like 16.6 repeating percent, which is much more reasonable. The other thing it has going for it is a number of good coverage moves. I personally think that it makes good use of moves like Draco Meteor and Overheat, which drop the user's special attack by 2, but you are just switching out most of the time anyway. But there's probably other stuff you can do as well, like its knockoff, like its Ice Spinner. Could be a physical attacker. It does have higher physical attack. I think that this Pokemon has a lot of potential. I don't know if it's like a world's winning Pokemon, but I think that it's certainly good enough that it should be solid on some teams at the very least. Our number 8 slot goes to the other Shed Tail Pokemon, Orthworm. This thing is great. I think it's super funny, but I think that it's actually a lot better than people are giving it credit for. Let's start with the negatives. Orthworm can struggle to do damage. It's really physically bulky, but its attack and special attack stats are just really not great. Its special defense stat is bad, and its HP isn't great, so it's a bit frail on the special side. That being said, there's a lot that is going for it, and I actually tested Orthworm on a team recently, and I was really impressed by it. I kind of just added it on to get a feel for it, and it actually ended up being really good. It has the single best defensive type in the game, being Steel, because it has so many resistances. On top of that, it has like an unbelievably good ability, Earth Eater. This is water absorb, but for ground type attacks. And I would argue that it's actually a lot more valuable because Earthquake is an easier move to fit in a team than like Surf. Steel types already have a ton of resistances and an immunity. So adding an additional immunity to a type that you were weak to that also heals you is really good. The main weakness that Orthworm has, in my opinion, is its inability to do damage. It does have some ways of augmenting this though. First, it gets both iron defense and body press. Now, body press is a really weird move that does damage based on how high your defense stat is instead of your attack stat. And Earthworm has a really high defense stat that it can boost further with iron defense. It also has access to Coil and Curse, which are other ways of doing damage, as well as Metal Burst, which I don't think any of these are great, but it's at least an option. The real reason it's this high though has to do with Shed Tail. We've already talked about how good Shed Tail is, and whereas Cyclizar is fast, which has its advantages, it can switch before the opponent attacks, which is nice, Earthworm is slow and tanky, and that adds a different dimension to Shed Tail. Whereas Cyclizar is probably moving first, which means that you are almost always going to be able to give up the 50% HP that you need in order to activate Shed Tail. Earthworm is slower and bulkier, which means like, yes, you might take too much damage and you might not be able to get Shed Tail up, but the advantage is that your Pokemon that switches in will have a full HP substitute. I don't think that Earthworm is going to be on every team, but especially if you pair it with a powerful ground type attacker like Garchomp, I think that it could be really good. The number 7 slot goes to Rabsca. When I first saw the pre-evolution of this Pokemon, I was like, there's no way anything in this line is worthwhile, but I actually really like Rabsca. It's a bug and psychic type Pokemon, which isn't great typing, but honestly isn't the worst, and it has actually really respectable stats. Its HP stat is perfectly fine, and both its defense and special defense are actually pretty good. Its special attack stat is also surprisingly high given how defensive it is, and that's nice because that means even if you don't invest in the special attack, it can probably still have some field presence. It does have a low base speed, but that's actually a positive and not a negative here because Rabsca is primarily going to be using Trick Room. The reason why I think Rabsca stands out is because it is one of 2 Pokemon in the game to learn Revival Blessing, one of the most broken moves ever created. Revival Blessing is like the item Revive, but in move form, and in competitive Pokemon where you're not allowed to use items from your bag, this is really good. I don't think Rabsca is easy to use, especially because I think a lot of the time you want to use it up front and not in the back, but I do think that it has a ton of potential. It has a surprisingly deep move pool on top of getting access to Revival Blessing with moves like Earth Power, Weather Ball, Recover, Calm Mind, Iron Defense, Sludge Bomb. There's a lot of good moves here. I think if this Pokemon had like Mimikyu typing, it would be very, very popular, and because Terrestrialization allows us to change the typing, I don't know, I think that this thing will definitely get some play. Okay, our number 6 Pokemon goes to a Pokemon that I'm sure many of you like quite a lot, Mabostiff. 120 base attack is very high, and its defenses are very respectable. It's also a lot faster than you'd think, with 85 base speed coming in at around a middle speed tier. It's pure dark, which is actually a really good typing right now. Dark type attacks are popular at the moment, as are ghost, as are psychic type attacks, and the immunity to prankster is also nice since Murkrow can be a pain. On top of that, it also has 3 really good abilities. Intimidate, which for a while was considered the best ability in the game. Between you and me, we kind of have to see how Clear Amulet does because it's kind of looking rough for the Intimidators, but I still have faith. It's really good, I'm sure. Just trust, just maybe not yet. It also gets Guard Dog, which is a cool move that blocks Intimidate in case Intimidate ever picks up. It's kind of like Defiant, but it only works for Intimidate. And then Stakeout, which is an ability that's never really seen competitive play, but that's because it was only on bad Pokemon before. But I think it could be good. It does double damage if the target switched in during the turn. It gets access to Jaw Lock, which previously was Dreadnaught's signature attack, but on a Dark type Pokemon could actually be pretty good. It prevents both the user and the target from switching, so it's nice to be able to lock Pokemon down, especially against like Murkrow, for example. It gets all the Elemental Fangs, it gets Wild Charge, it gets Play Rough, which I think is actually pretty important because it really benefits from Terra Fairy. So having a move that works like offensively and defensively, especially in a format with like Hydreigon and Garchomp, I think is really good. It also gets Comeuppance, which is a new move, and I think a lot of people haven't figured out, but especially if you were running like an Assault Vest set, I think it'd be really good. It basically is Metal Burst, but for Dark types, which is strong, and against a lot of the common spread damage moves like Make It Rain from Goldengo and Earthquake from Garchomp, I feel like this move could be really strong, especially since, like I said, Mabostiff has actually pretty good natural bulk. All in all, I think this is a really good Pokemon, and I definitely expect it to get some play. I just want to take a second and ask you to subscribe. For Scarlet and Violet, I have quadrupled the amount of videos that I'm putting out, so subscribing now is like the best bang for your buck. I'm really trying to be the first competitive Pokemon channel to reach 1 million subscribers, and I kind of need your help to do it. Regardless, I really appreciate you watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, number 5 is a Pokemon that I super underestimated. It's Scovillain, and when I first saw the design, I was like, this thing's awesome. And I saw the typing, I was like, this thing rocks. And then I saw the stats, and I was like, well, this thing's garbage. There's a couple things that make Scovillain actually really, really good, and I definitely expect it to become a threat once players figure it out. Basically, Scovillain has no bulk, which is bad. And it also has a relatively low speed stat for such a frail Pokemon, which is also bad. But on the plus side, both its attack and special attack are also bad. So it looks like a pretty bad Pokemon. Is part of the reason I overlooked it. It does have a signature attack, but its signature attack is also bad. There's a lot of reasons why I think a lot of people are overlooking this Pokemon, but I think they're wrong. I think I was wrong. The biggest reason, in my opinion, that I think this Pokemon is good is Chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is an ability given to grass-type Pokemon that doubles their speed in the sun. It's a very good ability that for a while has made sun one of the better weather conditions because fire types and grass types have good natural synergy with grass hitting the rock, ground, and water types that are super effective against fire. Scovillain is both a grass and a fire type. That means that in sun, it gets basically both of the benefits. So not only does Scovillain's speed double in the harsh sunlight, its fire type attacks also become stronger. So Terra Fire Scovillain with Overheat, with a Life Orb, and the strong sunlight is probably going to be doing some damage. Scovillain is one of the few Pokemon in the game that learns Rage Powder. Rage Powder is one of two moves in the game, the other being Follow Me, that redirects attacks to the user. It's a really good way of protecting your partner, and it's a big reason why Pachirisu won the World Championships in 2014. Redirection is so good that on both of my first two teams, I made sure to include a mouse hold with Follow Me, just because it's so nice to have. Scovillain is pretty frail, so its main purpose is never going to be redirecting attacks, but having it as an option is really nice, especially when you consider Torkoal has a move that does damage based on how much HP it has remaining, and it's really slow. Basically, I don't think that Scovillain is like the easiest Pokemon to use, but I think that it has monstrous potential, and I think that it's going to make a lot of players very frustrated once a good team is found with it. Our number 4 slot goes to a Pokemon that single-handedly pretty much swept my entire team during my playthrough. Espathra. Its stats are fine, I guess. It's relatively fast. It's faster than Garchomp, which is a big deal. It has like a pretty high HP stat. Its defenses kind of suck, and its special attack is middling. It's not great. It's not horrible. It's just in the middle. I don't think Psychic is a very good type personally, so being a pure Psychic type with middling stats might not make it look very appealing, which I think is part of the reason people aren't using it. I think the ability that most people were interested in when they first started looking at Espathra was Opportunist, which is its signature ability that says if a foe boosts a stat, Espathra also gets that stat boost. I think many players focus on Opportunist is a main reason that Espathra is currently being overlooked because it is a really good ability, but the fact of the matter is that ultimately, unless you're doing something like Flatter or you're boosting their stats in some way, activating it is kind of out of your control, right? If they don't want you to have the stat boost, then they simply won't boost. Unless you switch it in, but it's not that bulky, so it's kind of risky. To be clear, it's a good ability, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it do well, but I think it's inconsistent unless, you know, the metagame has a ton of boosters that just can't help themselves by boosting. The ability I'm more interested in is Speed Boost. This is a very powerful ability that gives the user a +1 boost to its speed at the end of every single turn. Let's talk about Espathra's move pool. It has a signature attack that is a Psychic type attack that is called Lumina Crash. What it does is it lowers the target's special defense by 2 stages while also doing a good bit of damage. So this is a strong move that combos with itself and actually does damage and works as a standalone move as well. This combination of Lumina Crash and Speed Boost is the main reason that I'm personally interested in Espathra. Having a Pokemon that's going to outspeed all your other Pokemon that can also lower your opponent's special defense is a really nice way to combo. Like imagine you had, I don't know, like a fast, like Hydreigon, for example, right? And you know, you use Lumina Crash and Dark Pulse, and unless your opponent is a Dark type, they're going to take a ton of damage, even if they switch into something like a Fairy type Pokemon like Sylveon. They're still taking so much damage, they can be KO'd next turn. And I think Speed Boost actually works really well with a lot of Espathra's other supporting moves. Reflect and Light Screen in particular catch my eye because it's really useful to get these moves up before your opponent has attacked for the turn, and Speed Boost can help you do this. And I like that with Reflect and Light Screen and Lumina Crash, it allows Espathra to be both an offensive supporting Pokemon and a defensive supporting Pokemon at the same time. It actually has a really wide move pool. It gets Helping Hand, it gets Ally Switch. I'm sure we'll see some Hypnosis Speed Boost Espathra at some point. It also gets Baton Pass, which is really cool. You can get a couple speed boosts and then baton pass on something and, you know, maintain the boost. I think that's pretty cool. Actually, I just looked, and in terms of coverage, that's kind of it. So it's mostly going to be using Lumina Crash and these supporting moves, but the supporting moves are really good. So I definitely think that this Pokemon is being underplayed. Our number 3 slot goes to the starter Pokemon Quaquaval. At the time I'm recording it, it feels like most players have recognized that Skeleturge and Meowscarada are actually really good Pokemon. Quaquaval, on the other hand, I think is actually a really good Pokemon as well, but is not seeing much play. First of all, Water and Fighting is actually really good typing, both offensively and defensively. You have a handful of weaknesses, but a lot of useful resistances such as Ice, Rock. Steel is really important right now because of Goldengo, Water. Quaquaval has a huge base attack of 120, which is really good, but it also has really good defenses. Well, not like really good, but it's not frail by any means. Unless it's taking a super effective hit, it'll probably survive, and that's a pretty big deal for a Pokemon who is hitting this hard. Its speed stat is probably a little lower than you'd like it to be, but that doesn't matter that much because I was going to talk about it later. Let's just do it now. Its signature attack, Aqua Step. Aqua Step is an 80 base power move that always boosts the user's speed stat by 1 stage. Aqua Step being an 80 base power move with no drawback that makes you faster is massive, especially when you consider it gets really good coverage moves. Close Combat, Ice Spinner, Brave Bird are all great. It also gets Wave Crash, and I think this alone, everything I've mentioned so far, is enough to say Quaquaval is being underrated. Quaquaval has access to Torrent, like all water-type starter Pokemon, but its hidden ability is Moxie. If this Pokemon gets a KO, it gets an attack boost. So if you get a KO with Aqua Step, Quaquaval gets +1 attack and +1 speed. Keep in mind that people use Dragon Dance, which is a move that does no damage that gives you +1 attack and +1 speed. To be able to get that while still doing damage is absurd, and it means that Quaquaval is actually a super threatening Pokemon, especially when you consider Terrestrialization. Being able to either boost your damage output or gain resistances or an immunity so you can stick around for longer is a really big deal. Quaquaval I think is better suited to kind of come in the back. Like I think you want to build your whole team around Quaquaval, or at least have in mind when you're building, whereas with the other two you can just lead them. The reason is you want Quaquaval to be picking up KOs, so you want to lead with something strong like, I don't know, Choice Band Garchomp or Choice Specs Goldengo, maybe Murkrow, get Tailwind up, and then try and clean up with Quaquaval when the opponent's out of position. And that's a bit harder. It's a little less intuitive, but it doesn't mean that it's less strong. I think this generation is really cool because all 3 of the starters are competitively viable, and I definitely think that we'll see them, if not winning events, coming close. Okay, our runner-up slot goes to Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur is a Pokemon I put pretty high up in the 10 best new Pokemon video, but it's not getting like any play right now. So it's possible that I was wrong. I probably overrated it a little bit, but I do still think that it's very, very strong. It's as strong as Landorus Therian. It's incredibly bulky, and it's actually pretty fast, especially given how good the rest of its stats are. The main thing holding it back is its typing, but with Terrestrialization, that's less of a big deal, and Ice and Dragon is still pretty decent offensive coverage, especially when you want to hit things for neutral damage. It has a really good ability that powers it up whenever it gets hit by a fire-type attack, and makes it immune to burn, which is one of the ways that you stop physical attackers. It has a signature move, Glaive Rush, which I think I was pronouncing wrong before. Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong now, who knows? Which is a really powerful move with a very manageable drawback, as well as a bunch of other good moves as well, like Ice Shard, Ice Spinner, Icicle Crash. I may have overrated this Pokemon in my top 10 best new Pokemon video, but I really do think that it's very strong, and I think this is a Pokemon where players just haven't figured out how to use it yet. They haven't figured out the right item, the right Terra type, the right moveset, the right EV spread, and the main drawback being the typing. I think that's very mitigatable since we can change our typing in this game. So I think keep your eye on this Pokemon. I think it's going to make a big splash once players figure out how to use it. Our last Pokemon, our number 1 Pokemon, is a Pokemon that is very difficult to figure out how to use, but once players do, it's going to be really scary. Palafin. It's also the Pokemon I ranked as the best new Pokemon in my other video, and it's also the most underrated Pokemon, but it's very strong. And if players figure out how to use it, they will absolutely be rewarded. I think it's probably fair to say that of the non-legendary, non-paradox Pokemon, Palafin has the single best stats of any new Pokemon added in this game, once it has transformed. Palafin is extremely powerful when it's in its hero form, but the only way to get it into its hero form is to bring it out into battle and then switch it out. This is a tough condition to activate because it kind of makes Palafin not super useful until it actually transforms, which just puts you on the back foot immediately. And that's the reason I think why we're not seeing it very much. But once this thing transforms, it is very strong. Water is a really good offensive type, especially for physical attackers, and Palafin has access to Wave Crash, which wasn't really a thing in past generations and is very, very powerful. It also gets a really strong priority water type attack, Jet Punch, as well as the utility move that does damage, Flip Turn, which is like U-turn or Volt Switch. It also gets Close Combat and Ice Punch to round out its coverage, but I think most of the time you're just going to be fine clicking water type attacks. I've built a couple teams with this thing on it, and though I haven't built anything that I really like because it's really tricky to use, when it gets going, it feels just unstoppable. It feels by far like the best new Pokemon when it's already in its hero form, which again is a big, condition. That being said, I have faith that competitive players will find a way to get this Pokemon into its hero form without that much drawback, and when they do, I think it's going to be incredible. I did feel kind of bad giving Palafin the number 1 spot on both the best and the most underrated, but maybe I'll give it the number 1 spot in the worst mon next time. Who knows? Let me know which Pokemon you think was underrated. Let me know what you think of my list. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye bye.